Portable medium format camera shootout. Let's go. So the truth is, both of these cameras are fantastic, and I basically want to keep both of them. But that doesn't make for a very interesting video. So I'm going to run through the sort of like 5 categories that I thought through in making a purchasing decision and trying to decide which one of these cameras I might keep, or both. At least the things I was thinking about if I were going to put one on the chopping block. So first, I'll talk about build quality, including lenses on these cameras. Then I'll talk about ergonomics of the cameras. Then I'll hit on everyone's favorite topic, image quality. Fourth, I'll talk about the performance and sort of the software and shooting experience of the cameras. And then fifth, I'll talk about intangibles and fun factor. Which of these cameras just makes you want to grab it, go out and shoot more? Oh, one more interjection. Like so many of my videos that I get passionate about things, the original version of this video, which I shot 2 or 3 different times with 2 or 3 different locations, got real ranty. So what I'm going to do here is give you a super succinct, 10-15 second conclusion for each of these sections, and then I'll put the longer rant version of the video after that. Here we go. The Hasselblad's build quality is just a little bit nicer. A great example of that is that the Fujifilm grip material feels like plastic, whereas the Hassy's grip material feels like real leather the way it should. Point goes to Hassy for build quality. Fujifilm has certainly stepped up its game since the X100-6. This aluminum top plate is really nice. The dials feel much better and clickier and just more solid than the X100-6. It's almost like-alike. Not quite, but very close. The only 2 gripes I have about the build quality of this camera are, 1, this grip material feels very plasticky. It wouldn't surprise me if this grip material actually is just plastic. I wouldn't call it leatherette. It feels like plastic. And then 2 is I actually think the front of the grip is okay. It could have been a tiny bit bigger, but it's actually the back here. I needed to put SmallRig's little extra thumb support to give me a better purchase on the camera. We'll get more into this, but you can't really put a thumb support on this guy, so you've really got to get the grip right on the camera because you can't add that thumb support in the hot shoe like you would in other Fujifilm rangefinder cameras. And then SmallRig doesn't make a black one, so you've got to have this like brown wood piece on your camera if you want a thumb support here. That's kind of a bummer. I guess this is also saying, hey, SmallRig, please make a black one of these, okay? Match the camera, for goodness sakes. I don't think you need, at least I don't for my big fat fingers, you don't need the SmallRig grip here, but it does exist if you wanted an Arca Swiss plate at the bottom of the camera. That comes in a package with this thumb support. So for me, this was kind of an expensive little thumb support to stick onto the camera. And then the 907X, I mean, this is typical Hasselblad build quality. Very well built, feels very premium. When you pop the door open, it has a nice snap and click to it. This might go out. I had the 907X 50C, and that door was starting to wear out. But until it does, it feels really good. All the buttons are nice and solid. The little dial here feels good. One thing that's crazy, and I'll get more into this, is you can't customize this at all. But for what it is, it feels very premium. So many nice touches. Like there's a little door in the USB-C port here, so it's covered. Like even Leica doesn't do that, The buttons feel really good here, just really nice. And then if you pair it with a V-series lens, you got the focus clutch, that feels fantastic. So Hasselblad does the build quality right. Would I say it's like a build quality? I'm not sure. I'd say it's pretty darn close, though. It feels pretty solid, so I would definitely put it in that category. These European camera manufacturers know what they're doing in terms of build quality. Well, the Hasselblad 907's form factor is a ton of fun. The charm kind of wears off because you can't customize the buttons, and there just aren't enough buttons to make it fun to shoot all the time, and there's no EVF. The Fujifilm GFX 100RF mimics a rangefinder camera, which is my personal favorite form factor for a camera, and just the traditional camera form factor works better in this context. So point goes to Fujifilm for ergonomics. So let's talk about the Fujifilm GFX 100RF, because you're probably more likely here because of this camera first. It's quite a bit lighter than the Hasselblad setup. It's quite impressive how light the camera is just overall, and it's a really nice size and package. Now, if we're being honest, it's actually quite a bit bigger than the X100-6. People that say, oh, well, it's almost the same size, it's just not. It's just a lot bigger and a lot heavier than the X100-6. I think the reality is that this camera would have been better and probably should have just been a full frame camera. They could have like reduced the size a little bit, made it just a little bit smaller, a little bit closer to the X100-6 in size, or like a little bit closer to a Leica M11, just saying. And I'm guessing these sort of like weird square proportions of the camera, they're like a little bit mutant in my opinion, come from the fact that there's a medium format sensor in here. In my opinion, you didn't really need a medium format sensor in this camera. Also, wish it had a flash like the X100-6, but you know what? It is what it is. It's got a hot shoe, you can put a flash on it. I've actually made a video about that. Godex makes really fun little flashes you can put on this that really don't add any weight or difficulty to the package. I think that basically, you know, sort of the tragedy of this camera is that Fuji could have made it just like a little bit more versatile if they had put a wider aperture on it, you know, a bigger, wider opening, like let's say even 2.5, maybe put IBIS in it, and then put a 35mm equivalent focal length, the flash too, basically just remade the X100-6 except with the medium format sensor. This would be a barn burner. It would be the perfect camera for me, basically, right? You know? And it's like, look, you know, Hasselblad has a 28mm pancake, and that's what I actually tested this with, but I had to send it back because I don't own that lens. But even with this 55, you know, which has a focus clutch, and we'll get into all that, you know, it's not that much bigger than this lens, especially when you put the lens hood that Fuji includes with the camera in the box. You know, it's really not that different from a length perspective. You know, this guy's a little girthier and a little bit heavier, but man, the focus clutch with the distance scale, and then it's 2.5 apertures, f2.5. I would much rather have that bigger lens, have this be less pocketable, and then, you know, have it be that more versatile lens. I think this camera is going to sell really well, but it would sell to a lot more people, and a lot more people would keep the camera after buying it if it had that more versatile lens on the front of it. It would be a much better everyday carry camera for lots of situations. And the last thing I don't like is this dial. The aspect ratio thing and the frame lines thing, they're kind of cool, but honestly, in my opinion, they're mostly a gimmick. They could have achieved this dial with a button here or something, and that would have been better. You know, the X-Pan mode is cool. I find this dial particularly annoying for a couple of reasons. One is like, if you look, if I'm just shooting in RAW, it doesn't do anything, okay? So you've got to switch your settings from RAW to RAW and JPEG, and then it will do this thing showing you the different aspect ratios you shoot in. So besides not working in RAW, my other big problem with this dial is that where it's situated makes it that you can't put a thumb support here like you can on the X100-6. And I really like having a thumb support there. I do this on the X100-6, I do it on my Leica cameras, and it irks me that you can't do it. Like SmallRig had to give you this adhesive thumb support thing you put on the back that looks kind of weird. It does work okay, but it's just not the same as having a regular old thumb support here. So, you know, next version Fuji, just take this off. You can put a little button here, or you can make it so it's mapped to this front, you know, telephoto zoom rocker thing. But just, you know, this dial is just annoying. The placement's just annoying. Or heck, you know, put it up here in the front, you know, so you can still put the thumb support back here. I just don't get it. Beyond that, I think Fujifilm has done basically everything right with this camera. It's got a flip-up screen that's sufficiently high resolution. Could be a little nicer, but good enough. The EVF is great. It's 5-point-something dots. It's the same as the GFX 100S Mark II. And that's just, it's the bare minimum, plus it's nice and big. It's great for manual focusing, even with my old man eyes. It's got a joystick. Love that, you know. The buttons are otherwise, you know, perfectly tactile. The dials are of much higher quality than on the X100-6. They're near and Leica quality now. Nice tactile, clicky feel. Just the right amount of resistance. I will say I wish the exposure compensation dial had a little lock button, because that gets changed very easily when you're taking it in and out of the bag. But not a huge deal. Same thing with the on and off switch. It's pretty easy to hit. Could have a little more resistance. The aperture ring, nice and clicky. Do I wish this had a distance scale for manual focusing? Yes, I do. But I will give it to Fuji. They have the best manual focusing scale on the back of the screen. So I can't really complain too much, because that basically works almost as well as having the distance scale on the lens. It's just nice to be able to see your distance scale on the front of the lens, and even when the camera's turned off. I like that it has 2 card slots. I wish it was CF Express Type B. That might help with the blackout issue, although I'm not sure. The Hasselblad has the same issue, and that only shoots CF Express Type B and internal memory. So I think it's more of a sensor issue than a memory card issue. But if they get an improved sensor, I think you're going to need CF Express Type B cards in here to make it work fast enough and read that big old sensor out fast enough, so that you don't have that blackout issue in the next generation. But yeah, I just love the form factor of this camera. I love the internal NDs. I don't mind the rocker. I think it's kind of gimmicky, but just like everything just kind of feels like it's in the right place. It feels good in the hand. It's just a joy to shoot. It's the kind of camera that you see on the shelf. You're like, man, I'm going to grab that guy and take it out shooting. I love shooting with that little guy, It's light enough you can carry it every day on your shoulder with a relatively thin strap. Just a really nicely done camera. Now let's talk about the Hasselblad. This is a pretty easy one. This is a very limited camera, right? This is basically just a digital back strapped to a lens. You can adapt it to a big old, 50C3, a 500 series camera. That's a lot of fun. I've made some videos on that already. Flip up screen, no EVF. Flip up screen is gorgeous. It makes the one on the Fuji look like trash. This looks like a 4K, a brand new monitor. The Fuji one looks like something from the 80s in comparison, and like tuning and colors of the screen. The most simple controls. You got a hole for the USB-C port, nothing else. This thing doesn't shoot video. The Fujifilm shoots some nice video. Not that you would use that camera for video without IBIS, but it's an option. No video on this guy. 1 card slot, CF Express Type B, which I like, and then it's got a terabyte of internal memory, so that's kind of like having 2 card slots. I like that. And then, of course, the biggest thing is that this is interchangeable lens. Size-wise, depending on kind of like how you slice it, this is actually smaller than the GFX. It's heavier, but it's smaller. And it fits in bags a little bit better too, because you can put it like this, right? And this will fit, in the same spot as a lens will fit in. And it might be smaller than a lot of lenses too. So you can stick this and another lens in a lot of very small bags. That's a really nice feature. But if I'm being honest, this form factor is kind of gimmicky, honestly. Like, there's some problems with it, Like, I've probably attached this to a 500 series camera like 5 times total and shot with it, and it gave neat results, but I don't know if it's like $2,000 worth of film camera gear just to put this back on it for fun, And it's a very slow experience. I can make a separate video about that if you're interested. Comment about it below. And then the other thing with the form factor, besides the lack of buttons, is, and I gotta step out here, is that it sits kind of funny on your body. It doesn't sit like this. It sits like this and kind of bangs against your body, which is not necessarily ideal. Whereas the Fujifilm just rests against your body, nice and flat, like any other camera, just like you would want a Leica or anything else. You just kind of look like a tourist with that thing on. Image quality. It's a wash. It's the same sensor in these cameras. It's up to personal preference. Some people like the HNCS color science. I'm kind of neutral. I actually like the 50C version better than the 100C version. I think Hasselblad kind of over pumped up the color science on these latest version of their cameras. And then on the Fujifilm side, it drives me nuts that they leaked the film simulations into their RAWs. You have to take out the film simulation curves and color preferences to get a neutral file to work from. Drives me nuts. So, maybe it's like neither one gets a point for image quality, or it's a wash, because it's basically the same thing, and it depends on what you prefer. One solution that's kind of like a little like oversaturated, the Hasselblad, or Fujifilm, which is like undersaturated and kind of purposely not perfect in the film simulations. It's a wash. And I'll put up some samples I shot with it.
I cannot meet you now. that had faded out.
And then here are a couple
We
comparison
were
images.
dancing in the dark. 3 days into June, at a crowded party, and then it was only you and me and the moon, and I didn't know what this love would be, swimming in the sweat.
The images out of these two cameras are very close. You know, if you want simplicity and ease of use, the colors out of here are probably a little bit more pleasing, especially because the white balance doesn't need tweaking. The Fuji is a little more fiddly. You know, you've got to touch up the white balance every time you change shooting scenario, and there's all these film simulations. But you can change a lot of stuff in the camera. If you like to tweak stuff and you like fiddling with settings of a camera, then you'll enjoy this one. In reality, I think the image quality of these two cameras is very, very similar, and it's a matter of personal taste. You can get the Fuji files to look like the Hasselblad files, and it's a little bit more work, but you can get the Hasselblad files to look like the Fuji files, and so on, vice versa. So, you know, I actually don't think image quality is a big deal here. Like, if you prefer the Fujifilm colors and user experience, the image quality is fantastic. If you prefer the simplicity of the Hasselblad system, the Hasselblad colors, the HNCS, Hasselblad Natural Color Solutions, then you're going to like this better. I think it's just really personal preference. Truthfully, the image quality is basically the same. If I'm being honest, I myself, you know, I've played with the Fujifilm cameras. I've proved you can get the exact same image. I've proved that if you set the white balance correctly, sometimes the colors are even more pleasing than the Hasselblad colors. But I get there's people that are in both camps. And again, I really think it's the same sensor. It's basically the same image quality. The Hasselblad makes it a little bit easier, and then the Hasselblad also has a big advantage in that it's an interchangeable lens camera. The Fujifilm lens on here is very good. It's sharp corner to corner, but it's an f4. Like, we can't really even talk about bokeh because you don't get much bokeh with this lens, right? Whereas like with this 55mm, it's magic. It looks so good. The bokeh looks so good. So, you know, like apples to apples, which is tough. In the comparison shots, I shot this with the 28mm f4P lens, which is like pretty comparable in like quality and build quality, all that stuff to this lens. And it was pretty comparable, you know, but then you put the 55mm or ostensibly you put the 90mm on, and this pulls ahead simply because those lenses will make portraits look better, right? So, you know, there is that. It's not necessarily like a technical or sensor driven or even colors image quality thing. It's just the ability to change focal length thing. That's a big advantage. Obviously, the Fujifilm has better autofocus. The eye tracking and face tracking work pretty well, whereas Hasselblad doesn't even have that. It has face recognition that only works sometimes. However, I think the thing that YouTubers don't talk about nearly enough on these cameras is that both have an extremely long blackout period. The blackout period is particularly long on the 100RF, I think because it doesn't use CF Express cards, unlike the Hasselblad. So, surprising result here, performance is also a wash. And then, of course, you know, the super simple Hasselblad menu. It's so much simpler and easier to use. The Fuji cameras, the menus are kind of a mess and they're so fiddly. You gotta change so many settings and tweak so many things. Like auto white balance doesn't really work very well with Fuji cameras, so you always gotta dial in the white balance if you want to get a nice result, you know, or like a color accurate result. You don't have to do this on this. The auto white balance just works great, you know. So it's much simpler interface. And then much simpler controls as well. There's really only two buttons on the front of this camera, the lens release button and the shutter button. There's a button on the side here, you know, so if you spin this wheel, the one and only wheel, it changes the aperture. If you press this little button on the side and then spin the wheel, it changes the shutter speed. There's no way to change what these do. It's locked in. You can't switch it. You can't make the shutter speed, the buttonless spin. It just is what it is. The only way to change the ISO and MEDI settings is through the touch screen. Makes me a little nervous that like the touch screen goes out if it's like cold and you know it's not recognizing your hand, you're just stuck. The app, the phone app, the iPhone app on this works much better than the Fuji version of their app, but it's still wonky. That wouldn't be a perfect solution. The noise reduction software in their app is killer. Fuji does not have that feature. And in fact, the low light performance might actually be better with a full frame sensor with larger pixels or a larger pixel pitch. You know, because this is a 100 megapixel sensor and the pixels are pretty tiny to get all those megapixels on the medium format sensor, even with a larger medium format sensor plane, it's not that great in low light. combined with the fact that it does not have IBIS, it's an f4 lens, and the thing that I ran into the most is that because the dial goes past 1/15th, which is about the slowest shutter speed you can use in low light conditions, it's really easy to forget, go past that. For some reason, the dial in this one, for me at least, just loves to land at 1/8 of a second, which means you're going to have a blurry, messed up shot, especially in low light, handheld or maybe even on a tripod. So, just like the touchiness of the medium format sensor with a bunch of factors make it not great in low light. The other couple of dislikes I have with this camera are things that I don't think anyone else on YouTube has talked about, and I really do think they need to be talked about. The bigger one is the blackout time in this camera. When you take a picture on this camera, the blackout period between pushing the shutter and when you can take another picture is really long. Look at this. 1/1000. It's like almost a full second. So if you're doing something slowly, ponderous, just taking your time, not a big deal. But like, if you're like out on the street trying to pop off some shots and shoot from the hip, that's a really long blackout period. And then on top of that, because the leaf shutter is so quiet, it's nearly silent, a lot of times it's hard to tell when in that 1 second blackout the shot's actually taken. Like I've taken some shots in the middle of the day, fast shutter speed, but they came out blurry because I thought the shutter had already popped, and obviously it hadn't, and I moved the camera down because I was done taking the picture. Made a blurry shot. You can tell the blur goes this direction. You can tell I did this. So that's a real problem, The blackout period is not as long on the GFX 100 Mark II, but it does have a blackout period. I noticed after realizing it was such an issue on this camera. And the Hasselblad also has a blackout period. 1/1000. That's like a little bit quicker than the Fujifilm GFX 100RF, but also is quite long. So what I'll say is like for all medium format cameras, this blackout period thing is a serious issue if you want to shoot anything fast, or you're on the street going pop, 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 right? Like I think that's the difference between, when someone talks about, if you're doing street shooting and you're like hunting for shots, you're like pop, 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 pop. This camera's not so good. But then if you're fishing for shots, taking your time and casting your wheel, and then composing and then looking and waiting and then taking the shot, this camera's good for that kind of street photography. I think what they're really talking about, and they're not realizing what they're talking about, is the blackout period. That because it's so long from pressing the shutter to being ready and being able to see what your next shot is, that you really can't do fast, in the moment shooting with these kinds of cameras. It's a little bit misleading because this form factor, and my experience with the X100VI, I think people's experience with the X100VI would lead you to believe that it is that quick shooting, fast pop, pop, pop in the street, hunting for shots all over the place kind of a camera. But it's not. It's definitely a fisherman's composing, taking my time kind of a camera. I think for me, the Fujifilm is a little bit more fun. I like the rangefinder format a little bit better than the box style of the 907X. Of course, the 907X you can put on a technical camera or on the back of a 500 series film camera, and that's really cool. But I found myself not really using these features, and the charm of the box camera kind of wore off, especially because it doesn't have an EVF. However, I would say both of these are not nearly as fun to use as a Leica M camera. So while I would give the point to Fujifilm, it's kind of like a half point, and I'd rather give the full point to a Leica M camera. I still think that's the most enjoyable, most fun, most rewarding digital camera experience on the market. At the end of the day, I think that these cameras are kind of for two different kinds of people. So I'm going to keep this relatively short because I think like who this camera is for thinking is very instructive when we're talking about these two cameras. Well, if you're a street photographer and you like to go hunting and shoot fast and shoot from the hip and go pop, 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 this camera is not for you. You're going to find it frustrating. The blackout period, now that I pointed it out to you, is going to drive you nuts. However, if you're a street photographer that's more of a documentarian, a fisherman, you compose your shots, you just hang out and wait for the shot, and you push the shutter once, and then it's going to be a while before you push the shutter again, you're going to love this camera. Similarly, if you're just like a documentarian and you take a shot every so often, you need the highest image quality, this is going to be a great camera for you. I think if you shoot landscape and the 28mm equivalent focal length is your focal length, then this is going to be a great camera for you. Personally, I would prefer 35 millimeters. That's what I like for shooting. I feel like it's a much more versatile focal range. But because it's an f4 lens, it doesn't really matter anyways. As it is, in my opinion, this thing is not really great for portraits. You know, you can do like environmental portraits where it doesn't matter if you have a shallow depth of field, but if you want to blow out that background, this ain't your camera. You know, basically, if you're a documentarian and you shoot slow, you're gonna love this camera, especially if you love that 28 millimeter focal length. If you're anybody else, I think you're gonna have my reaction to be a little bit disappointed at how handicapped and limited this camera is. Having said that though, man, I really enjoy shooting this camera. I love shooting this camera. You know, ironically, with the Fujifilm, I love the camera, but I don't love the lens. It's kind of like the opposite of the Leica Q3, where I love the lens, but I don't love the camera body, you know, no joystick, all those kinds of issues. So I'm still kind of toying with, like, does this work as my everyday carry camera, at least for during the day? You know, at night, you know, like, trust me, I tested it. I shot it at 1/15th, 1/8th, you know, 1/4th, 1/30th. If you're very still and you hold your breath, you can get a sharp shot in low light at high ISO at 1/15th of a second. As soon as you slip to 1/8th, which is very easy to do with this dial, as I said, it's blurry, it's off the rails. You know, there's just no forgiving. You know, I tested this a bunch, thought maybe I would get used to it. Nope, it's just not that good for low light shooting. It's just not. So, you know, which is a long way of saying, still, because I like shooting this camera so much, I'm still toying with keeping it just for my daytime everyday carry camera. I'm filming this in the Nikon ZF to see how the ZF does in video. That's probably a better choice for an everyday carry camera, except it's got low megapixel, so you can't crop as easily. This thing is a crop monster. You know, I think Fuji did the 28 millimeter focal length, so you could do the aspect ratios and do the telephoto zoom, and cropping in on this big 100 megapixel sensor isn't as much of a penalty. Even if you cut the thing in half, you're still at a 50 megapixel sensor, which is more megapixels than Nikon's, you know, flagship Z8 and Z9 cameras. But, you know, I get what Fujifilm was doing with this camera. Lots of croppability, you know, super light and compact, or as light and compact as you could be with a medium format camera. But just for me, it's not the perfect camera I was hoping it would be. Like I did with the Fuji, I'll answer, who is this camera for? This camera is for anyone that wants a modular digital back with this medium format sensor. People that use technical cameras, people that like to shoot with film cameras, you know, landscape photographers, product photographers. Cambo, Alpa, Arca Swiss, and Linhof all make technical cameras for this, which are all like in the thousands of dollars. Very interesting. I may get a Cambo system. I'm really intrigued by that, but this back is perfect for that. I think this probably works equally well as a travel camera or a street photography camera in the vein of the GFX 100RF, except that you don't have a viewfinder. So in really bright days, this screen might not cut it. You know, it's kind of a pain to shoot in low light and in really bright situations because the screen isn't nearly as good as an EVF that blocks out light and lets you see things. You can get an optical viewfinder that goes on the top, but that's kind of wonky. I think putting the grip on is kind of wonky, although that makes it a faster shooting experience. You know, I really just want this little package if I'm using it as a travel or street camera. Because it's so weird looking, I feel like you can get away with more on the street, especially because people don't realize it's a camera until they're up closer. They're like kind of wondering, what's that box in his hand? Whereas like, everybody knows this is a camera. It looks like the camera emoji on iPhone, you know? But this is not as ergonomic. So if you like to kind of go around, walk around with a camera in your hand, this will get heavy and sort of like start to hurt your wrist because you can't really carry it like this, especially if you've got this gorgeous 55 millimeter lens on there. So I don't know, like ultimately, I have to be honest that like I love this camera, but because of this like single wheel, single button stuff, and the lack of EVF, it kind of feels a little bit like a gimmick. And if the rumors are true that an X2D Mark II is coming out with a joystick and better autofocus, I'll almost certainly sell this, or this will go to the backup camera status and get that X2D Mark II. You know, I had some issues with the original X2D, not great customer support. I understand they've improved their customer support, so I'm willing to give it a try. But yeah, I think that like, unless you really are passionate about this, the novelties of this is going to wear off, and you're going to wish you had the X2D with its EVF, even though it's slow to switch, and its IBIS, and its class-leading IBIS. So just, fair warning. So again, I think both of these cameras are for fishermen. They are not speedy, pop, 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 street photography hunters. I think the Fuji is way more limited. If you're a documentarian photographer or a landscape photographer that likes 28 millimeters, then this camera's for you and you're going to love it. If you don't fall into that category, but you still want, optimum medium format image quality and you want interchangeable lenses, then the 907X should get a good hard look. As for me, I'm still struggling with this. I kind of want to keep both. But then, like this combo here, this is, $5,000. This used, I think I spent about $7,500 for everything here, This is an expensive corner of the photography world. I don't think I can really afford to keep both. If I could, I would probably keep this and use this during the day and use this any other time I needed more medium format photography solutions, low light, probably in the studio. Because of the interchangeable lens stuff when I'm shooting portraits, this 55 millimeter is a killer. I've got the 90 millimeter coming, more on that. So I don't know. I don't know if I also need the GFX 100RF. Since it's kind of hard to find, I might be able to get what I spent on it. And that might be the deciding factor. If I can, I'll probably sell it. But if I'm going to take a loss, I might just keep it and everyday carry, medium format for everything else. I don't know. I'm still deciding. So in conclusion, I think I've kind of made it clear. If you're a documentarian, slow shooter that likes to fish for their pictures, composes, takes their time, takes a shot, and then it's a while before you take another shot, and you like 28 millimeters, and you're not bothered by an f4 lens, and you're probably not shooting in low light, then this camera is for you. You're gonna love it. If some of those limitations bother you, or you want to change lenses and you want to have a compact medium format setup for travel, or just because you like small cameras like me, then this is probably the better choice, despite its weird ergonomics and gimmicky nature. I also think, the X2D, which I don't have here, is not that much bigger than the GFX 100RF. I think that might be the better choice for street photography, especially because it has IBIS. So, I'm keeping my eyes peeled for the X2D Mark II, and probably would sell this or relegate this to backup status once that comes out. But in the meantime, this works. It looks crazy. People don't know what it is, so that might be an advantage. But yeah, so what do you think? Have you tried both of these super luxury, super expensive, medium format, like portable travel cameras? Which one would you choose? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.